I am Madison Timmons.
I'm Chris Soucy.
And we're paranormal specialists who live in the most haunted city on earth, Savannah, Georgia. Every day is Halloween in our line of work, so join us as we spin true tales of haunts, murders, and disturbing Savannah history. I'm Madison.
I'm Chris.
And welcome to the most haunted city on earth. All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another bonus episode of the most haunted city on earth. My name is Madison Timmons.
I'm Chris Soucy.
And we also have JT Timmons.
Hey, what's up? I'm just pulling up these questions.
Yep, he's going to be asking us questions that we've found on our TikTok, our Instagram, our YouTube page. So we're going to answer some of y'all's questions. Also, just some announcements before we get started here. We have officially launched a Patreon. Woohoo!
Yay!
So if you do want to support us in that way, you're going to get so much cool content. We're going to do extra bonus episodes. There's going to be merch drops. There's going to be live investigations. So a lot of really fun stuff going on over there. So make sure to check that out. We're going to have links in our bio to our Patreon. But you can also find it at patreon.com/The Savannah Underground. So with that being said, I guess let's start with our coffee and ghost chat. So we all have our coffee this
And
morning.
it is actually patreon.com/Savannah Underground. Know thee.
Pardon me.
It's all good. I just wanted to clarify.
No articles in the Patreon.
I just thought it'd be easier.
No,
shorter,
absolutely.
But. All right, let's go ahead and get started, everybody. So the first question is SlappyX64 asks, what is a spirit?
We're kicking it off on a high note, apparently. Well, that's a very open-ended question because there's a lot of different types of things that can be classified as a spirit. So I guess in the broad sense of the question, a spirit is something that is no longer alive or has never been alive. So whether it's an intelligent haunting, a residual haunting, an entity, a demonic presence, a angelic force, and then, I mean, technically you can get into all the other realms of folklore where you get into the fae and then the wendigos and all that. Technically, the cryptids, those all could be considered a spirit. But I guess the very condensed version of a very lengthy response would be just something that operates in a different plane than us humans and is not alive.
I would definitely use the concept of planes. Imagine that we are on one page of a book and there is all these other things on other pages. They're stacked on top of each other. We're all in the same book, but our reality is one page, their reality is another page, and every now and then there's a piercing or a weakness between the pages, and we can perceive or see. There's a wear and tear to reality, and anything that exists outside of our page, you can consider a spirit. And they come in such a wide variety of definitions, and I think that you have to be kind of open. Because I'm always amazed that there are people who are very, very into ghosts, but will refute any other type of paranormal experience or any other thing, or people who are very, very into UFOs, but can't get behind the concept of a ghost. A lot of these things are connective. They are about our perception, our ability to perceive, and we are usually limited by the plane that we exist in. So when you think of astral planing, it's like going to another page, when you think of all of those things. So my analogy for the day is all of existence is a book. We are on one page, and there are things on the other pages that we can't perceive easily.
That's a very good analogy.
That is a very good analogy. Okay. All right. Thank you, SlappyX64. All right. Advocate for, number 4, yourself, you are self, asks, what is your thought on the moon? My body does not want to be in the moon. It's a negative energy for me.
Are you saying moon?
Moon.
Yeah,
Okay.
the moon. That's an interesting question because a lot of witchcraft and pagan beliefs kind of stem from both the moon and the sun. I mean, obviously all the other planets as well, but like the moon has always been seen as like this time of where the darkness and the your shadowy side can start to arise and things like that. So if you're having problems going out into the moon, like moonlight, I guess, maybe, obviously I do not know you as a person, but maybe you're working through that shadowy side of yourself. Maybe you have some trauma that you're dealing with, or maybe you're working through some different darker emotions. And just the moonlight itself can bring up those negative feelings and negative energies, and you're perceiving it as coming from the moon, but it's not necessarily that energy in particular. It might just be unleashing things that you need to break through. So that would be my take on it.
It's interesting because the moon, lunar is where we get the word lunacy, because it is so well perceived that people behave differently under a full moon, or with the concept of the bringing of the moon, the waxing and the waning of the moon. And I think that it's almost as easy as suggesting that we are as affected by the moon as the tides. Gravity is pulling on us. It is being slung around us, and it is creating pools, magnetic pools and things like that. Things that very sensitive people can utilize for their own purposes. That's, I believe, why there's a lot of witchcraft and a lot of spellcraft that comes from being under the full moon. Many of our legends are about what happens under the full moon, werewolves and vampires, all of this concept of this glowing orb in the sky. And if you go far enough back to the idea that there was a time when the moon was gone, it was pitch black dark at night, just dark as you can imagine. And that's a scary time. But when the moon came out, people could see in the night and do terrible things. They could move in the night. And so it's possible that our fear of moonlight does kind of stem from an idea that you're at risk of people who would take advantage of the fact that the moon is out and shining on everything to move about. So I think that there is a lot to unpack with the moon. There's a lot to go. And, when you think of like an ingrained generational trauma of moonlight means advantage to people who would take it. Sure. People who would take advantage of the moonlight, they would come out, and we would then, typify the full moon with evil, and the full moon with malcontent, and the full moon with bad moods and darkness. And that is a possibility of why the moon is linked to so many of our superstitions regarding evil. But I also think that we mistake evil a lot, or we mistake energies that can harm us for being evil. I think I've talked about this before. Like when a bear attacks a human being, we will say, "Oh, that bear was evil." It's an evil bear, but it's just a bear. It's acting like a bear. It's having bear-like tendencies. So, the fact that it attacked a person, we tend to ascribe all of these things to it. I think that's the truth with energy. People get harmed by an energy and like, oh, that was an evil energy. And it's like, well, maybe we didn't approach it right. Maybe it was a dangerous thing. I use fire as the example. Like when you go far enough back, people who encountered fire, they thought it was alive. It's moving. Yeah. You could feed it sticks and it'll eat it. And it had waste. It had all the attributes of something that was alive. And if it got on you, it hurt you. So you had to be very careful with it. And you had to be very gentle and kind of worship it in a way. And then it provided you warmth and it cooked your food. And all of a sudden,
it was so sweet.
It was this incredible tool. But I think there was probably a time when in our inability to recognize it was this force, this malevolent force that ate the forest. And, when it got on, Grog died. And we're like, oh, no, Grog, the fire ate him. So the fire did not eat him. It just, well, I guess technically it did. But it just burned him up.
Okay. When I was in high school living with my parents, my daddy always used to say, like I would go out, late with my friends and stuff, and if there was a full moon, Dad would always let me know, hey, it's a full moon. People are crazy tonight.
Right.
Yeah. People are and I was like, really? Like, I mean, thinking
that
back
just
to
a constant. Yeah.
Yeah. That's wild.
Well, and I mean, you got to think about history too. People used to operate before we adopted the Gregorian calendar, we operated off of how the moon was operating.
Absolutely.
The lunar calendar. So it affected everything you did. It affected when you were going to plant your crops. It was going to affect like when you were going to bathe, when you were going to have your menstrual cycle. So
we still use terms from that period, the harvest moon and things like that. We understand that the plan is, how does the earth change as the moon passes by? Because the sun is hyper effective on us. Absolutely. It's what gives us life. But the moon actually sways us. It comes and flows, ebbs and flows, the tide.
Okay. Cool. All right. Next question comes from Katie OCZ. Do you think the stalker in the cemetery could be Rene Rondolia? Oh, look at Chris's smile. He just glowed up.
Absolutely one of my favorite stories. Rene Asche Rondolia. He is by far one of Savannah's most famous boogeymen. And of the last 20 years, I'd say, he has become dismissed. He is a dismissed spirit. Many people do not believe he existed, or he ever existed. People think that he was a fabrication, which is a shame because it keeps people from telling the story, because the story is great. It is basically about, it's kind of like an evil Forrest Gump story. It is kind of this outcast. He was born physically odd. They say he had giganticism, so he was a very big child. Some people will say he also had hypertrichosis, which means he had hair everywhere. So some people would call him the Wolfman of Savannah. Some people call him the Beast of Savannah. But ultimately, he found refuge in the Colonial Park Cemetery because the cemetery used to be walled with a very tall wall. And so people couldn't see him, make fun of him, mock him, throw things at him. He was kind of a freak in Savannah and treated as such. He wasn't allowed to go to school. So he just lived out his life in kind of a feral way. And people used to release their pets, their dogs, into the cemetery because it was big walled. And then they'd come and pick them up at the end of the day. And according to legend, he would play with these dogs and he would get a little overly excited and kill the dogs. And then he would lay those dogs on the family plots of the families that owned the dogs. He knew well enough to do that. According to legend, he went on to kill 2 girls and lay their bodies on the family plot. So the connection was he did the same thing to girls that he did to dogs, although it was never proven. It was a lynch mob situation where everybody was like, kill the beast. And they showed up and they took him down and they hanged him. And he still marauds around the cemetery. And I've known this story since the 80s. And it was always this great story in Savannah. And I've known people to see shadowy figures in the cemetery, to experience this sensation of this big, gigantic, loping figure. There's even in, I think it's Warren Square, there's this huge, gigantic tree. And I had a friend who had an experience near this tree. And he was convinced that it was a Rene Asche experience.
Okay.
And it begged the question, is this the tree that they hanged him from? We would later learn that the tree that purportedly he was hanged on was actually on the river itself. It's where the Marriott on the far east end of River Street, where that stood. Apparently there was a hanging tree, which was used because when people came in, they could see the bodies hanging on the tree.
Oh, wow.
As a warning. We don't mess around. Savannah is, we mean business. Which
right there on the east side, that's where they had they actually hanged people, and when people came in, it was like, oh boy, it's a red
pirates beware.
It's a red state.
Yeah, they used to hang pirates just outside of almost every port.
God, I'm gonna have to cut this out.
Like pirates beware was the big thing. You got to be careful. Mm-hmm. But yes, as far as your question about Rene Asche, I think that there may be spirits that take on the persona of Rene Asche because of the expectation. I have a long-held belief that spirits that lose their identity seek identity and will take whatever identity you give to them. So the short answer to it, possibly the Shadow Stalker is Rene Asche, but not Rene Asche in the way that most people would think.
Madison, what do you have to say about that?
I personally don't know if Rene Asche is anything more than a tall tale. And,
Absolutely.
You know,
A
and
very tall tale.
quite literally.
Like 7 feet.
Yes. So, I mean, I completely agree with Chris that, you know, sometimes these spirits do take on these personas, and whatever's in the cemetery, you know, could very likely just know that it's getting that attention when people are like, oh, I heard about Rene Asche, and maybe that's him, maybe he's still here. But we actually went into, when we talked about the Colonial Park stalker, if you will, about how Chris knew a guy who would get the change out of the newspaper stand and whatnot, and how he got shot there. So that was kind of our theory of who that particular stalker might have been, but not to say there's not other spirits in the cemetery
absolutely.
that are also acting menacing and looming and whatnot.
Indeed, absolutely. Yeah. And yeah, like I said, I love the story of Rene Asche, but it is more than likely fabrication. But it's a fabrication, an old fabrication. And I think about it like Slender Man.
Yes.
We know Slender Man was absolutely created. It was actually created for a contest, you know, like a create an urban legend contest on Creepypasta. And yet now there are countless people who claim to have seen him, to experienced him, to understand him. And it's like, well, spirits crave identity, and you can pretty much identify a spirit as anything, and they will do their best to keep the connection to you. So be mindful of what you think when you're scared, or what you think when you're faced with some supernatural entity, because it's kind of like in Ghostbusters, you know, choose your destroyer. You know, it is definitely one of those things where our fears manifest in these beings, these entities.
And in the
no,
but in the case of Rene Asche, also we've seen very similar tales in lots of southern cities. That's another reason why I kind of think it is a little bit of a tall tale, is because you see it in New Orleans, you see it in Charleston, up until like Tennessee. I think they've had Rene Asche.
And that was the big question was, you know, is there an original, and was it Rene Asche? And, you know, because it's just a popular story.
Your brain needs support, and new Ollie Brainy Chews are a delightful way to take care of your cognitive health. Made with scientifically backed ingredients like Thai ginger, L-theanine, and caffeine, Brainy Chews support healthy brain function and help you find your focus, stay chill, or get energized. Be kind to your mind and get these nootropic chews at ollie.com. That's OLLY.com. These statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.
Obviously, the original's from here because we're the most haunted city on earth.
Well, I want to say that there was a time when someone dated this story back to the early 1800s, like 1810, 1811.
Really?
Yeah. And I was like, that's impressive. You know, that, you know, because regardless of fact, that's a long time for a word of mouth story to be rooted. And you think about all the people, all the children who have heard that story, and all the people who've grown up under the fear and threat of Rene Asche, this spirit. And then, you know, well, it's very likely that it is the boogeyman. It's a boogeyman that people, you know, tell each other.
Since instead of going to the next question, I'm going to go to the last question because it kind of has to do with this. Brackren SX asks, are cemeteries haunted? People never die there.
Well, actually, not always the case. Sometimes people do die there.
There's that guy who was beaten to death at the Colonial Park Cemetery.
Yeah, and the duels and
dueling
the
ground.
Yep, and the kid that died right outside the cemetery.
Right. Yep.
All sorts of
Lots
people.
of stories.
Come visit Savannah. We're not that dangerous.
Although-
We're not as dangerous as it sounds, I promise.
These are spread out stories. This is not just from like, oh yeah, those dueling grounds from the early 2000s.
No. Although
No, those are from the 90s.
it raises that interesting question because what a cemetery is a place to keep spirits. So when you ask, is a cemetery haunted? It's an interesting question because a lot of why a spirit hangs around is because they can't let go of the plane, of the place. There's a lot of things, unfinished business and whatnot. Their firmest grasp on this world is their body, their very bones. So we find a place to put them. Yes. And it's not in the house and it's not in the backyard anymore. It is some place special where we do ceremony, where we do ritual, and we have all these rituals that are basically saying, I'm saying goodbye. This is where you stay. And then, not coincidentally, we carve their names in stone. Now, really think about that. The act of carving anything into stone is to mark it forever. You're trying to say, this is your place. I bind you by your name to this stone. And that becomes a big part of the superstitions that we have about desecrating a grave or moving a tombstone. And a myriad of ghost stories are, in fact, just about people who moved a tombstone without moving a body, which, of course, Savannah is notorious for.
We got plenty of that.
We've got so many stories about that. So, the question of whether a cemetery is haunted or not kind of comes down to a lot of our beliefs about how to treat the dead are, in fact, about how to keep the dead from coming home or showing up or bothering us. They are about placing the spirit. And that is fascinating because I think there's that growing new trend. New, I say it's new. It's not new at all. But cremating people, putting them in urns, and having them at the house. Because this is, of course, I want to have the loved one with me. Or the loved one says, I want to be spread in ashes or over the ocean. I want to be spread all over the place. Because they know that their body is the meat machine that the spirit moves around, and we know how to drive the meat machine. And when the meat machine breaks down, we're like, oh no, the meat machine. And
we're all just meat machines.
Yeah, and we're attached to it because we know we know how it works. That's what we piloted through this whole weird plane. And there's going to be a part of us that will never leave. And I once heard, and it's fascinatingly enough, the idea of how long does a spirit remain? How long can a spirit remain? And the answer I got, I loved this answer. It was as long as a name is legible on a stone.
Ooh.
That's how long it takes.
So like about 100 years, maybe a little bit less.
Exactly. And I was like, that's such a cool concept. He's like, yeah, well, you carve the name into stone and that spirit's there and it's dissipating until you cannot read the stone, and then it's gone.
Interesting.
And it is interesting because I think that becomes like a ground point of whether or not, because we have hundreds old, ghosts that are hundreds and hundreds of years old.
Yeah.
I was like, but we keep them alive with stories.
Sure.
And we keep them alive with observation.
Yeah. There's also a really interesting kind of belief from the native people of Savannah, the Omicron Native Americans. They had this belief that wherever your bones reside is where your spirit resides. Mm-hmm. And which goes along very well with what you were saying, and it's an interesting concept to think of, is why they built these big burial mounds of sorts so that the tribe can kind of stay together even in the afterlife, and they're still congregated, because as long as your bones are there, and eventually your bones will turn to dust, and it will eventually kind of go back into the earth. So,
once upon a time.
Yeah, once upon a time, exactly.
Before we filled it with formaldehyde and
exactly
all these chemicals.
Yeah. So
why are we preserving bodies again? Anybody?
So it's an interesting concept of maybe that's when the spirits kind of pass over to, is when they're finally their bones are no longer.
It's kind of a beautiful concept, which is our life has a a longer purpose than the time that we're actually alive. You know, the instance of we have more to learn after we die. We have more to experience after we die, because as spirits in these meat machines, we aren't done when the meat machine goes. We carry on. And that's the belief of the afterlife. That's the belief of all these things.
Absolutely.
But I do think that when you look culturally, many cultures have so many different views, but they all kind of come around this idea of satisfying the body. Mm-hmm. You know, making sure that the body, because the spirit will never let it go. You know, the spirit's not going to just say, well, I died, I'm going to go.
Bye, meat machine.
And it's worth saying that a spirit is easily fractured, meaning you could have spiritual energy from the same entity in multiple locations. Like I can go to Abe Lincoln's childhood home and people are like, oh yeah, ghost of Abe Lincoln is here. And I can go to Washington, D.C. to the White House and they'll be like, oh yeah, Abraham Lincoln is here.
Another tall tale.
And yeah, 6'4". So that becomes just an interesting way of looking at it. Is the human spirit is timeless and can be multiple places at once. The human body actually limits us in our ability to be everywhere.
That is beautiful.
So,
Chris the Poet. All righty, here we go. On to the next one. Heather Bug with 2 G's, 85, asks, what do you think of the, and I've never heard of this, what do you think of the stone tape theory?
So, it's an interesting theory. So, for those of you who don't know what that means, essentially, it's this concept that spirits are energy, which, I mean, is very common throughout paranormal studies, but they believe that the energy goes into stone or rocks, and that is what amplifies the paranormal activity. So, there is some validity there because, I mean, rocks and stones and things like that can amplify paranormal activity. Like, look at the entire state of Florida. It's built on top of limestone. Limestone was used to help with the decomposition of bodies and burials and things like that. It naturally amplifies paranormal activity. But I don't necessarily know if rocks and stones are what are harboring ghosts and things like that.
So, yeah, I think we do have certain stones that obviously promote spiritual health, spiritual well-being, and can incur positive effects, negative effects, depending on how you use them. However, I'm not overly familiar with the actual stone tape theory per se, but I do know that when dealing in just gemology and stone work, stone has always been a very potent and powerful remnant. We use it because it endures more than the human body. And so I would imagine that if you were to categorize how much spiritual energy you can get from a stone or anything like that, probably a great deal, especially when you think of like Stonehenge and the things that people make that are spiritual monuments made of stone, the pyramids, all these things. They're edifices that weather time very well. And in many instances in my mind, spirituality and time perception are very closely linked. Because again, time is the way we perceive things. But it's possible that we're just doing it wrong or we're doing it the slow way. Sometimes I think of time like a cookie, and we're just taking a bite and a bite and a bite, but there are some entities out there that just eat the whole thing, just put the whole thing in their mouth, and they have access to all of the cookie. They have access to all of time. We're still just biting, bite by bite, trying to get through it. So
you can really explain to like kids like how ghosts work. Like seriously.
Yeah. Well, I spent a lot of time trying to make sense of it, but because we do it bite by bite, and other things do it all at once, they already have the vast experience, and they're perception of what's going on is so vastly different than what we are. They don't think of what happens next. They basically look at it as it's all happening all at once.
Gotcha.
Like the beginning and end of time are literally the same moment. And we are choosing to experience the infinitesimal fractions of it. But entities and beings that don't, and I'm getting to a point, stone endures. It's there through a long period of time, meaning it's catching up on all the events around it, all the energy that happens, all the things that move. We talk about like old houses, why they seem so haunted, is because they've been standing there a long time with an energy flowing through them in a very similar way. If you move a wall, you might get some disturbance of energy because the traffic flow changed, Savannah's very haunted because of the way it's laid out, and it's been the same way for so long that the energy flows. You start building giant hotels, you're going to get some friction, some spiritual friction.
The streets on River Street.
You're going to get some friction.
Yeah.
And so I think that's one of those things that anything that has been around for a long time is getting layers of energy throughout that time.
That's a really good point that I wanted to ask, Madison. You were extremely upset when they were ripping up the stones on River Street. I mean, literally, I didn't hear the end of this. Not kidding. She was at the time working for a company. This was before the Savannah Underground, right before the Savannah Underground.
Yeah.
And so you were doing something else for another company, and she would see it every night, and she'd come home furious. No night was a good night. I'd be there, I'd have a beer, I'd be just chilling, the pups in my lap, all of that, and then all of a sudden she busts through the door, and they're tearing up more River Street, and I was like. But, why did that make you so upset?
Well, one, because I'm a history nerd. And because of the fact that these stones that are down there have been there for so long. It's remarkable that they're still intact enough that we're able to drive over it and we're still able to walk on it, and it's a way to feel connected to the original city. So I'm not personally a big fan of ripping it up to build something new, especially because even though they say we're going to put it back, it's never going to be the same.
No, it's been interrupted. The energy has been interrupted, absolutely.
Exactly, and it's and that's a total sidebar of all the paranormal disturbances that'll come from that. But it's just changes the history in general, and just not a big fan of it, especially in a city that honors our history and honors our architectural
a lot
achievements. Yeah, we put a lot of effort in as a city to keep everything
to
intact.
preserve it.
The city
absolutely
cares.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean,
although it's gotten looser the last few years.
Yeah, I mean, I'm you're never going to be able to replace ballast stone from the 1800s. It's not ever going to happen.
Worth mentioning is that River Street, those stones are what they used to weigh down the ships coming in, but when they loaded them up with crops, with cotton and everything, they had to move the ballast stones out, and they used the ballast stones in the ships to create River Street and the River Walk. So
really?
Yeah.
How
Those
do
stones.
You know this stuff.
I've been around.
Oh my God! Since for how long, Chris?
Forever.
He's a vampire.
I'm a very old man.
Every time we do a podcast episode, you're just over here here's something no one knew.
That is a common knowledge thing.
That is.
Right?
That is.
But it's
okay. Maybe it's just
it's
me
not
then.
a normal. It's not a normal thing to talk about. But usually, when you get into any type of history of River Street, one of the first things you learn is that the stones were ballast stones. Ballast stones mean they weighed down the boats. And because boats would be loaded up here in America, they wanted them to travel empty. So those ballast stones were used to counterweight. And then, of course, they were taken off.
Sure.
Whatever was put on. And, that means that not only are these stones integral to the history of Savannah, they came from far away. And because I defy you to find a rock in Savannah. Go look, go dig all you want. You're not going to find some big, gigantic stone. That's not how it works here. We are in a swamp. Yes. So it's amazing that even the wall between River Street and Bay Street is just peppered with history, like tangible history.
Yeah, awesome. Sorry for that coffee gulp into the microphone. That was probably not enjoyable. Okay.
There's some ASMR people out there who are like, yes, drink more coffee.
That's
the wet noises.
Ooh, no. Ugh. Okay. All right, here we go. From, oh God. Okay. Lucery Lamas Quer. When I was 3, my imaginary friend showed me the craft and some dark stuff. Is that a demon?
Yes.
There you have it. Next question.
To simply put it, yes, that is a demon. Now,
I'm not talking about the movie.
Craft.
The craft. Oh God.
I'm just here for the dad jokes, y'all.
Yes, apparently.
Let's be real.
But with any kind of entity that's trying to teach you things, that is not an entity that is out for a good intent. Especially you saying that you were 3 and it was showing you dark stuff. That's malicious in its intent because you are too young to be knowing the darker side of paranormal and whatnot. And also, you're at a very impressionable age. So anything that's preying on that, it could be considered a demonic force. And also, a lot of times when kids report having imaginary friends, a lot of times they're talking to dead people. And a lot of times it is demonic presences. And like how we talked in one of the previous episodes, how a lot of times evil forces tend to prey on children because they have so much curiosity, so much imagination. They're way more open to it, and they're way less likely to push away something even if it's kind of frightening. So.
Oh, absolutely. And usually when you're dealing with a spirit that's like showing you methods of tapping into this energy and this power, those are entities trying to get through, trying to get you to open the door, and they're teaching you how to open the door for them. And it's very dangerous to take any information from an opportunistic, parasitic entity. And that's usually what they are. They're parasitic in the sense that they prey upon children because children have wide open senses and sensory perception. And then they teach them how to open the doors and how to get in. And that's oftentimes like the precursor to possession. Is it's teaching you how to be a vessel. It's teaching you how to, bring an entity into the world. And yeah, imaginary friends can be very freakish in a lot of those senses because sometimes they're so well constructed. And you can question a 3-year-old or 4-year-old about their imaginary friend, and they have so much information about them that you're like, wait, this is more than a construct. This is something you're familiar with. And and again, we use the word demon a lot and demonic, which kind of denotes a religious because of the word. But I want to go ahead and say that we use the word demonic to classify a type of energy or a type of entity that is harmful, that does harmful things. And that breaks it into different categories because we don't want it to, it's a blanket term. It really is.
It is.
So, it's a blanket term for something dangerous. But some entities that have all the demonic qualities are far more manageable than others. So there's a spectrum. But like I said, we definitely use the word demon. You'll hear us use demon a lot, but it's just because it's an easy way to discuss it.
Yes.
We could do a whole episode on just what a demon is because there's so much input, so much information, and so many variables.
Also, a lot of times too, that's how entities get into particular objects too, like how a lot of times when you see haunted dolls, it's because I've heard this many times where, the entity will ask the child, hey, I really like being with you. Can I live in your doll? And of course, because the child does not know better, they're going to be like, yes. And that immediately opens that threshold for them to be like, okay, well, now I'm here. And you can't get rid of it a lot of times.
Which also speaks to some very old superstitions about invitation. So many of our stories involve not inviting evil in. I mean, vampire lore literally states a vampire can't come into your house unless it's invited. And that comes from a long understanding that there are entities that need permission to come in, which suggests that all of us have an immense power. That power is, I have the power to grant some supernatural being access. And we never think that way. We think of ourselves as meat machines. We don't think of ourselves as these spiritual entities. We don't think of ourselves as having any power because the world makes us feel powerless. Mm-hmm. But the truth of the matter is we are immensely powerful, and we can make immense changes to reality through concerted effort, concerted belief, and, of course, ritual, which becomes how we manifest our intent into reality.
All right. Okay. All right. Next question is, and y'all keep asking these questions. Please. We need them. All right. These are great questions. What would you say is the most malevolent spirit in Savannah? And SFX Riot 9 asked that.
There's a lot of variables to this. Some people believe that one of the most malevolent spirits is the one that's in the basement of Moon River because it has literally attacked people. I'm trying to think of one that I would consider one of the most malevolent. I would also say one of the ones that are in the Sorrel Weed House because that one has also attacked people over a chair, right? It's like...
I've actually had bad experiences in both those places. Yeah. So, yes.
Of course you have, Chris.
Those are both solid. It's tricky. So, on the corners of Liberty and Lincoln. On Liberty and Lincoln, that is the first crossroads south of Colonial Park Cemetery. And it is the foundation point of the St. John the Baptist Church, cathedral. The thing to know about that is in the south, the first crossroads south of any cemetery is where you would go to meet the devil to sell your soul. And that gives us this access point, this idea in Southern culture, in Southern superstition, in belief. The devil is an entity that is easily reached in, anywhere near a cemetery, according to legend. Me and a friend, we actually put it to the test one night, and we came across a very... we actually encountered this man, this giant man, taller than me. I'm a very tall man, with a big, gigantic beard, and he was just sniffing like a dog. He was like, 3 o'clock in the morning, first crossroads south of a cemetery. And me and my friend were just like trying to not engage him because the trick of selling your soul to the devil, again, all legend, but this was a very scary moment, is that if you accept anything from the devil under any circumstances, you've exchanged your soul for whatever the devil gives you. There's no contract. The soul is exchanged when you accept anything from the devil. So if, some strange man in the middle of the night offers you a stick of gum, do not take it. We've heard stories of things like people sinking in quicksand and the devil showing up and saying, do you want a rope? Throwing them the rope, and when you accept the help, you've sold your soul.
What?
Yeah, and again, these are legends, but when you're asking what's the most malevolent force, I encountered a spirit that this strange man, I had actually experienced that sensation before in 12 West Oglethorpe, which is a marvelously haunted place, which is now a restaurant.
Yes.
So if you want to, you can go. It's Husk now. Go and sit and have a meal. I can't do it, but
You said a block south of a cemetery.
the first intersection south of a
Hold
cemetery.
on. That we had a fan send. I think did I send it to you, or maybe I was going to show it to you. It's a photo on Liberty and Abercorn at the church.
That too is the first.
Yo. Okay, so a fan sent us a photo, and I can't tell if it's real or not. You know, I mean, I'm not saying that our fans create fake ghost photos, but I can't put my name behind it unless I took the photo, and I know it's not doctored. But there's this. You know the photo I'm talking about. It's the thing with the face in the bottom left corner, right at that.
Oh, yes.
Yes, there's something in the shadows in this photo, and I will. I'll put it up. I'll put it up in the podcast here. But yeah, it's
Does
like
it have
this
a timestamp on the picture? I'd be very interested in what time it is.
It does not. It's just a cell phone picture, and it was taken during a tour.
That's
she
interesting.
said.
So the thing is, too, you got to remember about Colonial Park Cemetery is that cemetery used to extend a block in every direction.
That's right.
At one point. So it could be something like that, but at the same time, it very likely could be some kind of residual energy from the cemetery.
From the actual cemetery, right.
But it's showing up.
No, I like this better. Don't be a buzzkill. I like this better.
Sorry, I have to be the one to
Although,
bring in the...
technically, it does not go north because right after because it cuts off right at Abercorn, because then you're getting into the old slave burial grounds, and you're getting into the Irish and black burial grounds, all of which still there, but no sign of them. Like there was a concerted effort to move the black graves to Laurel Grove, and they actually set up a section of Laurel Grove Cemetery, but there's no record of the thousands upon thousands of bodies that they would have had to have moved. None.
Oh, Lord.
They just built 2 squares right on top of these. Yeah, and it's very...
That's the 432 Abercorn one?
Yeah.
Yes.
All right, so we're not going to talk about it now, but we do have an episode coming for 432. Promise. It's been highly asked for, so.
Yes. And so it's a fascinating little vortex right there.
Yeah.
Between spirits that were not acknowledged as human. They were buried, and you can imagine that slave burials were probably not given all due respect and all the attempts to do it. I once read a tale that was basically a person would die, a slave would die, but the day's work would still have to happen. So the only time that they could bury them was at night. And they would be not given like time or resources, and if there was any type of marker, it was probably wooden, and it was probably very basic. So just taking that in consideration, the energies of that of Abercorn and Jones Street is like this conflict of those that were considered others and those that were considered true Savannans. They were separated in this one strip spiritually. It's a very intense area.
Is.
You draw a circle right there and be like, this is where there is conflict, spiritual conflict.
All right. And y'all, this is the last question, and it's actually quite a funny one. That's why we saved it for last. Is Johnny Gannum's haunted? Savannah native 666 asked that. Sav native. Sorry.
It is full of spirits. Full of spirits.
I get it.
And for those of you who are not from Savannah, it's a liquor store. So
it's our liquor store. Like, I mean, Savannah's liquor store. We love it.
It's a locally owned liquor store. So,
it's on Gaston and Habersham Street.
Yeah.
Actually, near the vortex.
So
would that
be
over
row of buildings is right across the street from the
Amethyst.
Right, the Amethyst and the Gastonian.
Yes.
Yeah.
Both very haunted bed and breakfasts. That whole area, because I want to say that I had heard that is the area of the Irish burial grounds that were not before they were included as citizens, but also where apparently, and again, I don't have as much verification on this, but in that area there was a gallows, and it was specifically for people that would not be executed in the prime location. These were kind of like organized lynchings, really, when it came down to it. And it was the justice system of the outcast, because generally speaking, there was a Savannah that was run and governed, and then there was these Tinseltown, Frogtown, all these little embankment, encroachment settlements all around it in the early years, and they would actually enact their own system of justice, their own, those things. And again, I don't have anything secure on it, but that was the kind of thing that in conversation with historians or in conversation with people who have a sense of Savannah, that's kind of what they would tell you is, because there's a building right on Abercorn and Gaston Street where an uncanny amount of suicides occurred over the years.
Really?
Yes. And somebody was like, what the weirdest thing about those suicides is, it was all hangings. I was like, all hangings? And he's like, yeah, people just hang themselves in this building. And I was like, that's really weird. He's like, no, it's especially weird because it's not particularly tall. Like the ceiling space is not particularly tall, so that you have to get kind of creative. And I was like, that's so weird. Do you know any reason why? And the answer was, I believe that there used to be like a citizen's gallows or I don't know what the term would be.
Gallows.
Yeah, it would be a place where maybe the authorities wouldn't look too closely if somebody were hanging there. And again, I don't know if that's true. I just know that was a story that was given to me in explanation of inexplicable things.
So where my brain goes to immediately is the Candler Oak that is right by Johnny Gannon's. It's about a block away. But they used to hang a lot of people in that tree, specifically African-American people, but because it was said that, African-American people weren't allowed to cross through Forsyth Park. And if they were found doing that, they would get hanged in the Candler Oak.
And it's worth noting that Savannah ended at basically Liberty. And then what you're dealing with is a kind of amalgam of farmland and, other things. So the Candler Oak was a landmark long before it became, consumed by the city.
Yes.
So it makes sense that even then they would see it and be like, that's the place to enact justice, in the wilds of Savannah, because that would be what that is, pines and wild, before it was all functioned.
Cool.
All right. Well, this has been a lot of fun, different topics. We've gone through all sorts of stuff this episode. So, awesome. Well, we're going to go ahead and start wrapping up a little bit. But I do want to say thank you guys so much for supporting us always. We really appreciate it. Make sure to follow us on TikTok at the Savannah Underground and also on Instagram. Again, make sure to check out our Patreon, too, if that is something that you're interested in. It's going to, like I said, have so much cool content, and we're cooking up lots of fun things for y'all. But with that, JT, do you have anything you'd like to say?
Just keep asking questions because, these are great questions that we've been getting, so love it.
Awesome. Chris, do you have a ghost tip for us?
Oh, gee. I guess the main one we actually covered in today is pro ghost tip: don't invite any spirits into your living experience, your living situation. Don't invite spirits into yourself. There's a lot of interesting go-arounds with communicating with spirits, but be very wary of those words: invitation, invocation. Definitely don't say, here's a doll you can hang out in. Those are the kinds of things that usually end poorly for the people who are involved.
Yeah, you don't want an Annabelle. So, okay, well, with that being said, thank you guys again. We will see you on every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, since we'll be uploading that every week now. So my name is Madison Timmons.
I'm Chris Susi.
And stay spooky, y'all.